So welcome back to the last new Mercury reading of 2014. We're going to take a little bit of a break during the holidays, and we'll be back at the end of January, last Saturday in January. And I'm not going to tell you who's reading them because I don't know. Actually, I know two of the people who will be reading them, but let's keep it a surprise. So I've been asked to let you all know that the author Sheila Heti is going to be reading at MICA on Monday, October 27th, 7 p.m. at the Lazarus Auditorium. That reading is free and open to the public, so please stroll on up there to hear Sheila Heti. What's the name of her book again, Makita? How Should a Person Be? Got a lot of publicity, a lot of talk about that book, so I'm sure it'll be an interesting reading. Okay, so we're going to start our second half with the mystery man, Earl Crown. Tonight I learned his true name and identity, but I'm not going to share it with you. Maybe you can weasel it out of him. Baltimore native Earl Crown has written creative nonfiction and short fiction pieces for publications such as Smile Hun, you're in Baltimore, Humanize Magazine, We'll Never Have Paris, The Bicycle Review, and Tales of Blood and Roses, among others. He's participated in the new Mercury Reading Series before, and he's also been a speaker at the Stoop Storytelling Series. He's currently writing a nonfiction book titled Alpha White, which will be published in the fall of 2015. And in addition to writing and storytelling, he also hosts a radio show, which airs every Saturday from 4 to 6 p.m. and Thursdays from noon to 2 p.m. on Loyola University's radio station, WLOY. I didn't even know Loyola University, which is my alma mater, had a radio station. His radio show, Crucial Cuts with Earl Crown, has been nominated by Radio Flag as the best music show on the planet. High recommendation. Crucial Cuts will be syndicated to other independent radio stations around the world beginning in December 2014. Please welcome Earl Crown.
Hello. Thanks for coming out tonight. I appreciate it. I definitely want to thank WLOY for giving me a chance to get back on the radio. I used to jock before WTMD was WTMD, it was WCVT. Back when it had, a soul. And, so I was happy to get back on the radio after 20 years of not being on the radio. You plugged everything for me already. I was going to stand here and plug stuff, but you did that for me already. What I will do is I will plug briefly a magazine called Smile Hun, you're in Baltimore. Utney Reader has nominated us twice for some kind of award. We don't win it because we're Baltimore, but they at least nominate us. And I think we get Best Zine awards from various publications as well. I'm going to read two stories. First one I'm going to read tonight is from the next issue of Smile Hun, which will be out in December. Okay? Give you a little bit of background. I also used to own a nightclub called the Talking Head Club. And my partner was very notorious, and he's now in prison for the next 15 years because he was selling a lot of drugs, and you probably shouldn't do that. And you can read all about Dan McIntosh and what an absolute piece of shit he is in the City paper, because Van Smith did a series of nice articles about what a lowlife Dan is. So this is a story about him and about me and a young lady we knew. This is called, and again, it's from the next issue of Smile Hun. This is called Your Face Hurts My Feelings by Earl Crown. I have never seen such a small penis on an adult. I've played football and I've lived in a men's dormitory, so I've seen a wide variety of dicks. Dan's penis was the tiniest, saddest little member I've ever seen on a grown man. Even erect, his minuscule cock was downright infantile, and it suited him. Dan was a mouthy, low-rent would-be thug from Hamden. He'd used his pathetic little pecker to scatter bastard children all over Baltimore, and he was delinquent on his child support payments with 3 different women. He was an aggressive weed dealer with a Napoleon complex. Worst of all, he was my partner in the nightclub. Dan was kneeling on the floor of the stage, trying to press his tiny dick against a girl's lips. The girl, Kara, refused to let him put it in her mouth. She reached back and gave him a half-hearted hand job in pitiful consolation. She was far more interested in what I was doing to her. Kara was 5 feet of sex, all eyes and hair and boobs. She crammed her voluptuousness into skin-tight outfits, and she jiggled when she walked. Her heritage was Sicilian and Brazilian, and she had a tan, exotic look. I watched her as she lay on her back, her left breast undulating as she stroked Dan's leprechaun cock. She had amazing breasts, but she was very self-conscious about her large areoli, and she rarely removed her bra even during sex. I thought her areoli were fantastic and suited her perfectly. Okay, as apparently civilized human beings, we often deny our animal origins. What happened was my printer, it prints the first page last, right? My printer got fucked up right before I ran out of ink right before I got here. That's how my life works. Anyway, as apparently civilized human beings, we often deny our animal origins. But sexual competition and lust reveal our uglier, primitive traits. Despite my disgust with the situation, I ignored my conscience and proceeded to give her a thorough fucking. I wanted to please her as much as I wanted to please myself, really as a matter of pride. It was about 4 in the morning. The three of us had been partying together since about 8 o'clock that evening. We'd been smoking weed in our office at the nightclub while bands were playing. We'd eaten some ecstasy around midnight, and when the club closed around 2 a.m., we started getting into the cocaine. We cut out big rails of blow and stored them right off the bar as we listened to Bowie's Pinups. If you don't know what Pinups is, that's an album where David Bowie did all covers, covered other people's material, and it's a must-own. You should have Pinups. If you don't, you know, get it. By 3:30 a.m., Kara's clothes were coming off. I put the first Roxy Music record on the sound system while she danced around the stage, kicked off her shoes, and removed her top. By 4 a.m., the three of us were having sloppy sex on a pile on the stage. Dan had effectively stolen 19-year-old Kara from one of his flunkies, a fat hippie named Nick. Nick and Kara had been dating for years, but Dan managed to pry her away from him. Despite Dan's betrayal, Nick continued to serve his master, Dan. In the coming months, Nick would even take the fall for Dan in a minor drug bust. Nick was so loyal to Dan that he refused to turn state's witness against his master and spent a few months in prison as a reward for his misplaced loyalty. I suppose that there was some nobility and integrity within Nick, but he was another fool. Dan and Kara had both used Nick and discarded him when he had outlived his usefulness. Despite his anatomical shortcomings, Dan was handsome and charming, albeit in a very shallow, predictable way. He was stylish and smooth, and he used those traits to ensnare vulnerable women. He flattered and charmed his way into bed with these women, and his tactics were especially effective with women who had low self-esteem. But his chronic dishonesty, violent temper, and midget dick inevitably drove them away. Now I was in the process of stealing Kara from Dan. In the coming months, I would also steal his baby mama number 2 and take her to Vegas. Picking up Dan's leftovers was a lucrative trade for me when we were nightclub partners. He routinely chased girls into my opportunistic arms. Kara was 10 years younger than me. She was a bit chubby, but that's how I prefer my women. I'm a man who appreciates curves. She had large almond-colored eyes, long dark hair that draped against her plump tan breasts. Kara was tiny, but she partied like a 300-pound biker. I have never seen before or since a body that could take as much punishment as hers. It took me a long time to come, probably because of all the drugs we'd done. We were a panting, sweating mess, humping our way to the last track of Roxy Music's first record, which was on repeat on the CD changer. I pulled out of her and came all over the stage. Dan was vigorously jacking off like some nasty little monkey at the zoo. The scene was seedy, disgusting, and sad. I collapsed onto my back, exhausted and panting. Dan got up and went to the bar to do a few more bumps. Kara slurred, this was hilarious, this really happened. Kara slurred, "You guys have pleasured me in so many ways." And I burst into laughter. Her statement and the whole scene seemed ridiculous to me. It also made me suspect that she hadn't really had an orgasm. I spent the next minute or so cackling and pulling up my pants. I felt a combination of shame, disgust, and satisfaction. I surveyed the stage, the empty beer bottles and crumpled clothes, the scattered evidence of the night's debauchery. I watched sweaty, naked Kara struggling to stand up, and noticed Dan's look of frustration from being cock-blocked by me. Kara was pulling her panties up over her plump ass when her skirt began to vibrate and crawl across the floor. We were both startled by the sight of her skirt moving on its own until she realized it was her phone ringing in her pocket. Kara had to yell to be heard on the phone as the music was blasting out of the massive speakers on the stage, and I walked over to the sound booth and turned down the volume. What is my phone? Gina, she yelled. Gina was Kara's older, even more attractive sister. I had met Gina before I ever knew Kara. Gina was a waitress at one of my then favorite restaurants, Los Amigos on Harford Road. I had been enamored with Gina for years, but I didn't really know much about her, aside from the fact that she was pregnant by her thick-necked, quick-tempered junkie boyfriend, Bob. Kara's face lit up as she continued hollering into her flip phone. "Oh my God, you had the baby. Is she okay? Are you okay?" A few minutes later, I was driving across town from the nightclub on Cathedral Street, because that's where the Talking Head originally was, to Hopkins Hospital on Broadway, with Kara in the passenger seat. Dan had chosen to stay behind, presumably to cram even more cocaine into his face. Kara and I were going to meet her newborn niece. The theme to Get Carter was playing on my stereo as we parked on Monument Street. It was still dark outside. A scrawny, shady dude tried to sell us some Ready Rock as we approached the hospital entrance. Johns Hopkins Hospital is in a terrible neighborhood, and that neighborhood was even worse in 2003. We burst into Gina's delivery room. Actually, I should say hospital rooms. That's something I'll edit. Because she wasn't actually delivering when we showed up. She's in the hospital room. Gina, Kara's mom, and Kara's little Sicilian father were eyeing me up, and I suddenly felt very self-conscious and guilty. Bob, the father of Gina's baby, was conspicuously absent. With all eyes in the room fixed on me, I walked over to Gina and kissed her on the forehead. She smiled at me and presented me the newborn that was sleeping on her chest. I picked up the fragile pink creature and cradled her in my arms. The baby yawned, and I was instantly in love with this infant. I almost cried. The filth and fury of the past few hours had been purged from my brain. In that moment, all I cared about was this precious baby girl. It was as if holding her was a sort of second baptism. I felt like the weight of the night's sins had been lifted from my shoulders. That baby girl is 11 years old now. Her parents, Gina and Bob, are both in prison for attempted murder. Dan's crimes grew bolder in scope and more serious in the years that followed. He was busted not long ago and sent to federal prison for the next 14 years. You can read about his legal problems in the city paper. My involvement in the nightclub ended a few months after that bizarre evening. I severed my ties with that thuggish midget. My involvement with Kara continued for a while. We had numerous drug-fueled misadventures in the years to come, but ultimately we were never romantically linked. Our bond was based on lust, music, and substance abuse, and our non-relationship was doomed to failure from the start. What I truly desired was to be loved, but she was the wrong woman for romance. All we did was fuck and fight, and all I got was mediocre sex and hurt feelings. Kara moved out west a few years ago, and I'm glad. We're better off with a continent between us. I have an old hard drive full of pictures of Kara. I found her to be exceptionally beautiful, but I can't look at those pictures anymore. Thank you. Oh, shucks. All right, this next one isn't nearly as filthy. I promise. All right, this is from the first issue of Smile for which I ever wrote. This was the waste issue. This is, I guess, from maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I wrote a short essay about Springfield Hospital Center. My father worked there for 30 years. And as some of you may know, there's a connection between Springfield and Napoleon Bonaparte. And we'll get into that in this piece. And some very fine people have written books about Springfield that are far more detailed than what I'm going to read you. But if you're interested in this, then you should explore the subject further. This is called Baltimore Bonaparte's Nurse Ratchet Days and the Martin Gross Neglect. Napoleon Bonaparte had a brother named Jerome who briefly visited the United States in 1803 as the captain of a French naval frigate. One of the cities Captain Jerome Bonaparte visited was Baltimore. During his short stay in Charm City, Jerome Bonaparte met and fell in love with Betsy Patterson, the beautiful underage daughter of William Patterson, a wealthy local merchant and farmer. This belle of the Baltimore so enchanted Jerome that after a whirlwind romance, he married her in Baltimore and without the consent of his powerful brother Napoleon. Jerome sailed back to Baltimore on this French ship with his new bride Betsy Patterson in tow. When the couple arrived at the port of Lisbon, they were met by Napoleon's representatives. Napoleon was furious with his brother. The first consul, and later emperor of France, had other plans for his brother and refused to allow the marriage to move forward. Napoleon personally declared the marriage non-existent and attempted to pay off the heartbroken Betsy with a pension of 60,000 francs per year. Although the Pope never officially sanctioned the annulment of Jerome and Betsy's marriage, Napoleon would not change his mind, and the marriage was forcibly ended. Jerome Bonaparte was coerced by Napoleon into marrying a plump German princess, and Betsy Patterson was sent back to Baltimore without the last name Bonaparte. Betsy Patterson spent the rest of her life brokenhearted over the doomed marriage to Jerome Bonaparte. Betsy's ocean voyage to Europe and the time Jerome spent trying to appeal to his brother had amounted to nothing more than wasted effort to save a love that could never be. Betsy subsequently wasted considerable time and wealth over the years trying to reassert what she considered to be a rightful claim to the name Bonaparte. She lived well into her 90s, having wasted decades of intense emotion on a brief, doomed marriage. The Patterson family had intended to contribute one of their country estates to Springfield as Betsy's dowry. Springfield's sprawling farm acreage and stately manor house lay in the Patapsco Valley, just west of what is now Liberty Reservoir, and could have made a fine home for the ill-fated couple, a home worthy of a Bonaparte and a beautiful Baltimore baroness. Instead, the Springfield estate stood as a tragic reminder of wasted love. In 1894, the state of Maryland needed to open a second hospital for the insane since its one and only facility was becoming overcrowded. Maryland Governor Frank Brown, another descendant of William Patterson, owned Springfield at the time. In a move that certainly would be considered too obviously corrupt to happen today, the sitting governor sold the Brown-Patterson estate, Springfield, to the state of Maryland. Springfield Estate became Maryland's second state mental hospital, with the first patients arriving in 1896. Initially, the original Patterson House, which is actually burned to the ground since then, and the other original farm buildings were used to house the patients. Over the next 6 decades, Springfield's facilities were expanded with numerous buildings and complexes constructed to house an ever-increasing patient population. By the 1950s, there were approximately 3,000 resident patients living at Springfield Hospital Center. Springfield Hospital became like a self-contained town for both the patients and staff. It boasted its own police and fire departments, its own power plant, a hog farm, grain fields, a chicken farm, barns, a chapel, surgical facilities, tennis courts, baseball diamonds, swimming pools, cafeterias and canteens, a cannery, auditoriums, dormitories for the nursing staff, cottages for the doctors, and a series of underground tunnels connecting many of the buildings. Those tunnels still exist, by the way. Springfield even had its own railway spur to allow supplies, patients, and staff to move into and agricultural products to move out of Springfield. Many of the patients themselves toiled in Springfield's barns and fields, providing the hospital with most of its own food needs. Hundreds of staff, mostly from the neighboring towns of Sykesville and Eldersburg, found employment at Springfield Hospital Center. Obviously, doctors and nurses were among those staff, but Springfield also employed dietary workers, groundskeepers, full-time police, farmers, carpenters, electricians, and a host of other types of professionals. Springfield had a close symbiotic relationship with the surrounding community, providing an economic foundation for those Baltimore suburbs long before suburban sprawl, before the national highway system made commuting the norm among the middle class. I'm going to stop there. What I get into in the rest of the article is that now most of Springfield lies empty. And when you look around at the homeless population of Baltimore, you should realize that a lot of those people would have been institutionalized before. And because Reagan cut the shit out of the budget in the 80s, those people are now out on the street. So we have all these homeless people and all these empty buildings that the state owns, but we can't put those people in those buildings. And I think that's tragic. So, all right, thank you so much.